Hi, this is Pam, and this is going to be a quick video recap of the presentation I gave in Chicago, where I covered how dental labs can start working more closely with dentists and taking the first steps into digital denture workflows. So whether you're exploring digital dentures for the first time or looking to refine your approach, hopefully this presentation will walk you through some of the steps and how to get started. When we're talking about digital dentures, I think the dentures community has been doing this for quite a while, but it is a much different strategy when we're bringing this into a lab. Denturists are able to do everything in-house, and I think that is why they've been able to succeed with these workflows. Now, that means that we as the lab industry can learn from their mistakes and learn from their strategies and learn from what they have done in-house, and we can start to implement them on a greater scale. Now, when we're working with dentists, the conversations will change quite a bit because we don't have the same control as a denturist does. So we've been talking about digital dentures since probably 2020, and really has been an emphasis at the trade shows since that time. And yet, when we're looking in industry, we're not seeing a large adoption. And that's for a bunch of reasons. And I think a big one is that we are, as labs, not used to being the ones leading the charge. Typically, the dentists are leading it, and we are following with our expertise. With this specific product, with this specific task, we are going to need to lead this, and we're going to need to guide this, which means that we need to have the confidence and the understanding to speak with our dentists. So really, there are three main challenges when we're looking from a lab's perspective, or at least three that I'd like to focus on today. The first one being the workforce. I know that there is an aging population of removables technicians, and a lot of that knowledge isn't necessarily being passed down. So how do we actually grow our removables workforce? How do we hire those unicorns? And how do we approach that problem? The next one is the actual workflows, which we will talk a little bit more in depth today. We need to be guiding the clinical workflows. When we're looking at digital dentures, the clinical workflows is what changes the most. And then how do we actually get started, and how do we implement this, and how do we scale this? Is this scalable, and what does that look like? So let's start with workforce. This is something that I had spoken to in a previous lecture last year, but we'll go through a couple of things here today. So three main points that I'd like to touch on real quick before we get into the workflows. Number one is finding removables technicians. And I get this question often, where do I find a unicorn, or where do I find someone like you who is working in a lab and who is implementing all of these things? And if you find a unicorn, or if you know someone who you consider a unicorn, you can ask them and they'll tell you they don't just appear. They are typically people who are really curious, who like computers, or who just like solving puzzles, who have been given an opportunity to learn and be trained. And sometimes you don't even need to find somebody with a solid dental background, but you do need to have the capacity or the ability to train them. And if it's somebody who is capable of learning on their own, giving them videos and resources is an excellent start. However, if you have analog technicians already in your lab who know analog in and out, these are the people that you should be using to train. And maybe those people aren't going to be the ones to become the designers. Maybe they are looking for retirement, or maybe they want to work their next 5 years remaining in analog. That's okay. But you need to be hiring people who can learn the knowledge and the theory from those staff. And when you're looking at your staff, when you're moving forward, you're going to have two types of staff. You're going to have designers and manufacturers. Now, in smaller situations, your designers will also be your manufacturers. But the people who have the theory, the people who understand setting teeth and understand how to make a functional denture and understand how to communicate the needs with the dentist, they're going to be extremely busy designing cases and communicating these steps with the dentist. That maybe some of your other staff who are currently doing processing or polishing or waxing, they can be focused on manufacturing. In larger lab settings, we already have this divide. We already have stations where people are setting teeth only and remaining people are processing only or waxing only or polishing only. And when we get into digital, the same amount of work is still needed, but the factors can change. So you'll have somebody who should be dedicated to working with the dentist and actually setting the cases, and somebody who is dedicated to running the machines and doing the manufacturing. Now, as you get started, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, you might not be doing the manufacturing in-house, but that also means that you're going to have some analog cases and some digital cases, and you're still going to have repairs and relines that need to be done analog. So you will not be able to 100% get rid of your analog work, and therefore you still need some analog staff to handle some of that work. So as you transition, it's always good to have a transition plan. I am never advocating for laying off staff or for removing staff. We are just transitioning their roles, especially extremely valuable removable staff that are very, very hard to replace and very hard to acquire right now as our industry is aging out of removable staff. And then cross-training. It is really important, if you can, to cross-train your staff and to get those staff comfortable. Maybe you don't have any removable staff, but you want to add dentures into your workflow. So the lecture that we covered last year, and you can find it on the Argen YouTube page, it goes through the fundamentals and the basics design of a denture and how to look at the flanges and what an incisive papilla is and what the functional limits are and all of the basics of actually making a functional denture. If you have crown and bridge technicians that are doing full arch cases in zirconia, doing a full arch case in zirconia is very, very, very different than doing a full arch case in dentures. You can click the buttons. The software might not be that hard, but understanding how to actually make a functional denture does take some practice and does take some communication with your dentist. So the next thing that we'll spend a little bit more time on is the actual workflows. Your staff needs to be confident, at least one person in your office needs to be confident in what the workflows are and how you can work with your dentist in communicating these workflows. So to start, we'll just review an analog workflow. So everybody knows in an analog workflow, you typically start with preliminary impressions, and then you go to a custom tray, and then a wax rim. The one in this example is a wax rim and a custom tray all in one. And then however you're going to achieve that, then you're going to do a wax try-in, and then you're going to go to finish. So we already know this workflow, we're confident with this, and it's pretty rigid. There are some ways where we can mix and match, we can make custom trays into wax rims, but for the most part, this is always going to be a very similar workflow every single time. And when we get into digital, it opens up so many more options, but that can be overwhelming, and you need to be confident in at least one or two of these options before you move forward. So one of the options is a 4-appointment workflow. This is really good if you're starting with practitioners who don't necessarily want to start a fully digital workflow. So step number 1 is still preliminary impressions. And step number 2 is still a wax rim, or if you wanted to go the route that with a pin tracer, or they call it a nathometer, you could do that. You could do a printed custom tray. You could still pour these in plaster like this image is here and do a traditional custom tray with a wax rim. However, you need to get to that point. You need to get to a point where you have final impressions, and those final impressions can be articulated somehow. Once you have final impressions, this is where you need to change your internal workflow and stop pouring models. This is probably the biggest shift in the lab, is we are no longer pouring models for final impressions. We should have some way of having 2 impressions, final impressions that are articulated, that we can scan in. And that is where your digital workflow is going to start. And then from there, you're going to design a try-in, a printed try-in. You're going to send that to the dentist. We will talk about the benefits of that here in a moment. And then you can go to finish, milled or printed, in-house or outsourced. Another option is a reference denture or a copy denture. This term reference denture can be used for multiple workflows, so just keep that in mind. Some of these terms are flexible and might be used in different ways in different presentations. So this is a really, really good sales pitch for your dentist to start talking about a copy denture or a reference denture workflow. Every single denture that goes into their clinics, they should be scanning. typically when they do a consult for a denture patient, they don't always see that patient come back. And when they do see that patient come back, it's when a dog has eaten their denture, or they have lost their denture on a cruise ship, or they put their denture in a napkin and somebody threw it in the garbage. And then when they're going back to the dentist, they have nothing. They don't have any record of what their old patient looked like, how it fit, or anything. So if every single consult that they do, they are scanning a copy denture, it's going to set them up for ease of use moving forward. It will also, if they sell it correctly to their patients, if they pitch this correctly, it will guarantee that that patient comes back to them when they are ready. So it is on us as a lab community to give these tools to their dentists and explain to them how. Now, this workflow does require that the dentist has a scanner on site. This can be an intraoral scanner, or this can be a bench scanner. You can scan a copy denture with all of the major intraoral scanners. Medit, Trios, PrimeScan, they all have the ability to scan a copy denture, and they're all fairly user-friendly. What they would do is they would send you that scan of that copy denture, and you would print it out exactly as is. No changes needed. What they can do, the clinic, if they need to, they can grind out the undercuts, they can adjust the flange if they need to, and they can make it basically into a custom tray, in which they will do wash impressions, final wash impressions. And this will give you, the lab, 2 final impressions that are articulated. They should also be taking a bite. Anytime you do a wash impression in a denture, it's going to change the bite. So they have to be taking a bite. Just put some registration in between those 2 arches, put that in the patient's mouth, something that you can articulate while you're scanning. You're going to scan that in and give them a printed try-in, and then you're going to go to finish. There is another option for a 3-appointment workflow, and this type of workflow is not designated for every patient. There are some challenges with this. Where this really works good is if you have clinics that are really far north or somewhere remote and they need something right away, or they can't get the patient back in for another appointment for a while, or some kind of circumstance like that. Or if you have a clinic that is just really pushy and wants to get this done right away. So they can do a wash impression in the patient's current denture. They have to scan that wash impression, and my suggestion is anytime a dentist is scanning an impression in anything and sending it to you, ask them for a full copy denture scan every time. They will have the option in their intraoral scanners to scan it as a quote-unquote impression or as a copy denture. It should always be scanned as a copy denture. You, as the laboratory, need the maximum amount of data. And if you receive a copy denture scan, it will give you all of the tools that you need to make a try-in denture. From there, you're going to make a try-in, and then you're going to go to finish. Again, the difficulties with this is the dentist is now going to be scanning in that final impression, the final tissue fitting surface, and then they are ripping that impression out of that denture. So if they are not good at scanning or they didn't capture everything, it's gone now because they have to take that impression out and send the patient home. Whereas if you go back to the previous workflow here, when you do a wash impression in a copy denture, that is sent to the lab and you have that in your case pan. So if you need to do a new scan of it or you need to evaluate the impression, it's still there, which is a little bit safer, especially when we're getting started. So my recommendations would be to start with a workflow similar to this. So when we're actually looking at the benefits of these workflows, it's not just the chair time that's being saved. It's also the lab time that we are saving. And I'm going to pull up an ROI sheet here in a second that I did not pull up at the trade show, but I'll add it to this presentation. So if we're looking at an analog denture and we're looking at the hands-on labor, it's about 4.4 hours, and the processing time about 3 hours. And then if we're going to do that reference denture, the 3-appointment where they are taking a wash impression inside the patient's denture, you can see the technician time goes down drastically and the processing time goes up a bit. And then same with this last one. So I'm going to pull up an ROI sheet and actually go through this just, together with you guys. So if we look at an analog case here, we can see I've kind of broken down the actual time here. And so it's going through every step, the preliminary impressions. How long does it take you to pour? How long does it take you to make a custom tray? The final impressions. How long does it take you to pour the finals, mount it, block it out, set the teeth, make cured bases, all of these things. And then the try-in, all of these things here too. And then for insert, there's no technician time. But these are the 4 appointments that we'd be looking at for analog. So we're looking at analog here. The technician labor, the actual labor that the technician is doing, is around 4.4 hours. And you can change this and adjust this and break this down for your lab, but this just gives us a general idea. And the processing time, so it's sitting on the bench or it's curing or it's cooking, is about 3 hours. Now, with the processing time, most of this processing is not happening overnight. This is still happening during the day. We still have to keep an eye on things, especially if we are doing injection. We still have to check for red lines. We have to make sure it's not boiling over. We're still attentive and aware of what's going on. We don't necessarily have equipment that's going to tell us, hey, something broke, or it's not going to give us alerts when it's finished. Even when we're setting cases and we're waiting for the stone to set, we don't necessarily have timers going off. So it's not quite as efficient as it could be if we had machines doing the calculating and doing this part for us. So if we go down into digital from a dentulist, so this would be, they have preliminary impressions, and in this specific example, they're doing a nathometer or a custom tray. So scanning the impressions, designing a nathometer, and then to actually nest and print it. So I did a very, very high calculation for printing, about 120 minutes, and 65 minutes of post-processing mean washing and curing. Now this would depend on which printer you have, so this time could be drastically different. And then we would go into the final impressions, how long it takes to scan it, how long does it take to design a try-in. I put 50 minutes to design a try-in, nest it and print your try-in, and then send that out. And then here again, once it comes back, we can adjust it for finish and nest it for milling, mill it, etc., etc. And then it's going to go into inserts. You can see the 4 appointments here. And so if we look at the actual timing here, digital from a dentulist, the technician labor, the hands-on labor that your technicians are going to be doing is reduced almost in half. Now, the processing time is drastically higher, but this isn't necessarily all in one day. This is for every single appointment. This depends on what printer you have, what mill you have, how you're manufacturing this, and if you are manufacturing this in-house or not. And when I was a lab technician and I was originally thinking about this, I, in my brain, thought, well, I could produce a denture faster than I could print or mill it, especially when we were thinking about this in 2016. The print times and the mill times were insanely high, like 5 hours. So yeah, as a lab technician, I could probably still to this day process a denture faster. But all of my time and energy is on processing that one case. Whereas while this is processing here, while this is milling or printing overnight or over lunch hours or into the evening, I, as a lab technician, can be designing other cases or not working overtime and eating into that overtime budget. And then if we look at the reference denture, so this would be a wash impression in the patient's denture. And this is assuming that we are scanning it. We can also assume that the dentist is going to scan this. It would take a little bit of time off. But a wash impression, we would go through scanning, design a try-in. They would go through a try-in, and we would do all the steps to manufacture that after. And you can see the hands-on time for a lab technician is even less because there are less clinical appointments. And the processing time will reflect that also. So if we hop back over to our slides here, you can see there really is a big difference in the analog compared to some of the workflows that we could accomplish in the lab. And this is really where you're going to see the savings. It's not necessarily going to be in the end product. The goal isn't to drive the printed denture to the cheapest product possible. And I think as a lab industry, we have an opportunity to set the standard here. And you're going to see competitors, you're going to see labs offering printed dentures for cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, when realistically you can still be saving money and you can still be making this an effective business practice without driving your prices down to a drastically unrealistically low price. So we talked about the workflows, and additionally, I'm gonna show you one more document that I will share along with this video, and that is the digital denture workflow kind of cheat sheet guide. So this I will send this to along with the video recording, and This is good for dentists to look at, or even just for your lab staff to look at. And this is, again, based on the clinical workflows. You have to understand the clinical workflows before you can start implementing this into your clinic. So the first one here would be scanning a wash impression in the customer's current denture. The next one would be scanning a copy denture. So the first appointment, they are scanning a copy denture. The second appointment, you're doing a wash impression in that copy denture. These two in the middle here would be assuming that the patient has no denture and we're starting from 0. So that is either preliminary tray and also a triple tray bite. This is a triple tray preliminary bite. This is not the final bite. From there, you can go into anathometer. This is more of an Ivoclar workflow. They have some really good videos on their website specifically for this workflow. And then if you don't want to go into anathometer, you could do a preliminary impression and make either digital custom trays or analog custom trays, put some wax rims on there and go into final impressions here. The goal is you have to have 2 scanned impressions that can be articulated together because we are no longer mounting these, we are no longer pouring models at this point. Now down at the bottom is speaking to edentulous. And I will speak to this briefly because I think the industry as a whole has done a really good job at convincing us that when we speak digital dentures, we are immediately speaking to a scanned, fully edentulous arch. If you are just starting in this and you are just starting to implement these workflows, absolutely do not start with a scanned edentulous arch. This is the hardest, most challenging workflow for 2 reasons. One, you are now relying on a stitched scan from your dentist. This is the hardest scan to do in the dental office. It is definitely possible. The scanners are absolutely there and can do these. However, you have to have an understanding of how to use your scanner and how to check that the data has been stitched correctly. Second, how are you achieving a bite? When you have 2 fully edentulous arches, there are lots of different ways to calculate or find a bite, but it is difficult. So if we are starting with this and we are trying to transition more dentists, focus on the easier workflows, especially these 2 here that use workflows that they are traditionally already accustomed to. Really lean into this copy denture one. Now, if you have customers that really want to go all in edentulous, take your time, start 1 case at a time, and start 1 practitioner at a time. It is doable. The other part that I will add to that is if you can imagine that we are taking a closed mouth impression, it is very different from taking an open mouth impression with a scanner. Your retromolar pads on the lower have to be stretched all the way wide open in order to take an edentulous scan. So what you are now capturing is a stretched retromolar pad area, and you are putting a hard plastic denture on top of that. And there have been some arguments that this is no longer a functional lower denture. For upper dentures, you will see great success online, and there's a lot of chat groups that are showing these, a lot of articles, and you have to measure what success is to you. Is success a denture that they can chew with as long as they have denture glue in their mouth, or is success a suction fitting denture? And whatever your dentists are looking for and whatever you are deciding to output as a lab, you need to determine that. So for those reasons, I would not necessarily start with this workflow. It is still a validated workflow, but start with something a little bit easier. And this very last one on the bottom is specifically for immediate dentures, which is a whole other conversation, and we can definitely have that conversation, but you will be able to do a lot more with your immediate dentures when moving into digital workflows. So we've talked a little bit about the workforce, the workflows, and how do we actually implement this? How do we actually get started? Before we really dive into that, I need to express the importance of the printed try-in. This is going to be your most difficult selling challenge. This is going to be where you have the biggest pushback, and to really get your dentist on board, you need to express the benefits of the printed try-in. This is really where you're going to have the most success and where you can get your dentist excited about doing something like this. So with a printed try-in, it's going to be an identical fit to the final denture. So let's take ourselves on a journey here. When we do a wax try-in, that wax try-in is on our desk and it is probably set very perfect. The contacts are good, everything is set up so that it fits perfectly. And then we're going to pry it off of those models, and we're going to put it maybe at our receptionist desk. They might wash it in a bleach bath, or they might put it in water, or they might spray a solution on it to make sure that it's clean. Then they're going to put it in a bag. That bag then either goes on a bus, a train, a plane, or it probably most likely goes into your driver's car. Now, depending on where you are, depending on the time of year, it could be really hot in that car. It could be really cold in that car. It could be really hot outside and really cold in the car. It could be really cold outside and really hot in the car. That bag could be under a bunch of other bags. Now, by the time that's actually delivered to the office, it could be several hours later. It could be the next day since you had set the wax. By the time it's actually put into the patient's mouth, it could be 2 to 3 days since you set the wax. That wax has now been warmed and cooled multiple times. It's gone through multiple different environments. It's been in different baths, been different cleaning solutions. So by the time it actually gets to the patient's mouth, we have no way of knowing that what we set on our bench is what the dentist is putting in the mouth. And so what do? Typically, I know you've all seen it before, they will take a wash impression inside the wax up because in their minds, it's not fitting very well. Of course it's not fitting very well. We had to block this out on the model, and it's traveled all this distance to get to you. Or potentially, it's hitting really heavy in the 7s, or the midline is off. We don't know if what we saw on the bench is what they're seeing in the mouth. And then, several days later, that case comes back. It travels the whole journey back. Maybe it has a new wash impression. Maybe it has a new bite. Now we're putting it back in our articulator, and it could be anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks before it's back on our articulator. And we've already set and designed 200 other cases. We have no memory of how we actually originally set this, and we don't really know if how we're receiving it is how we even sent it out the door. What if, instead, we had a piece of plastic that's going to fit exactly the same as when it leaves our office to when it comes back to our office, and it's going to fit the same as the final product. It doesn't matter if it gets too hot or too cold. It doesn't matter what's going on. When we get that case back, the dentist, if they have ground the teeth off, if they've done a wash impression, if they have taken a new bite, we will always have a reference to how we set it exactly before. And we can always compare to how it left our office on day 1 and how it's coming back from them. And because of this, this actually opens up a lot more options for your dentist too. The patients can actually wear this home. And so if the patient wears this home, this will open up a lot of options for therapeutic treatment applications. So if you have dentists that want to go above and beyond, maybe a prosthodontist or maybe a high-end practitioner that is dealing with complicated cases, you are now opening up a whole world of applications that they can use this for. For example, if the patient needs to open the bite by 8 millimeters or something crazy, if we did that in a wax try-in and we sent it to them and the patient sits there for 2 seconds and says whatever they need to say, we have no guarantee that this is not going to cause TMJ issues. How about we open it 8 millimeters and we send the patient home with this? If you are using majority of the try-in resins in Canada, are Health Canada approved for up to 30 days in the mouth. Patient can take this home and they can practice wearing it. We can send them to a TMJ specialist while they're wearing it. We can even send them to a speech therapist while they're wearing it. If you're trying to correct speech, I guarantee you will not be able to correct speech by having them say 66 and 55 in a 2-minute session with a wax try-in. And so with a printed try-in like this, we are opening the doors for more treatment applications. Realistically, though, what this is primarily going to be doing is strengthening your communication with the dentist. You can still do adjustments on this. They can grind all those teeth off. They can mark it with a Sharpie. They can take a photo of it in the patient's mouth. They can take a wash impression. Anything they need to do, they can send it to you. And what that's doing is it's going to give you all of the communication that you need because, again, this has not changed from when it left your desk. So you have a direct comparison from when it was on your desk to when you have it now in your lab. And this is going to make the communication so much smoother. This is what's going to guarantee one try-in. This is what's going to push you to have maximum efficiency because you can have better communication with your dentist. And you need to be confident in how to sell this to your dentist. Because if you just say, let's go digital, and you send them a printed try-in, they're going to have no idea what to do with it. They're going to say, what is this? I don't know how to use this. I don't know what to do with this. And they're going to push back because dentists are used to what they know. And what they know is they can typically take the wax, they can move it around, they can make changes, they can have some control there. They're not going to be able to do that, but that does not outweigh all of the benefits of having an object like this. So for you to really be confident in these workflows, I urge you to focus on the positives of the printed try-in and use this as a selling point when working with your dentist. So where do we actually get started? Number one is in confidence. You have to know the clinical workflows and you have to know what you're asking for. What data do you need from the dentist at what steps, and what are you going to give them in return? Where are you switching from analog to digital, and what does that look like in your lab? You will not have confidence until you start and do a couple of them, but you really have to be confident before you can scale this. You can't just say, we're going to do this and send out an email to all of your lab or all of your clinics and expect them to do it with you. We are guiding this. The labs are guiding this. So we have to be confident in what we are selling. Partner, find the right dentist to start with. Find one lab technician or one small group of lab technicians in your lab to be responsible for this. Somebody in your lab that is going to be responsible for all the communications to one or two dentists. Just start there. Somebody who can take their focus away from analog just for a little bit every single day and focus on these digital workflows. And then when you are with those one or two dentists, try multiple workflows. Have them do a wash impression, have them scan a copy denture, have them scan it as an impression, have them send the actual patient's denture. Try a case where you have to scan in a new bite. Try a case where you have to scan in a new wash impression. Try a case where you're trying to copy and replicate their old denture exactly. Try a case where you have a dentulous and no physical denture. You have to try all of these first. So working with a dentist that is going to allow you to practice and do some different things. And maybe when they have one patient in the chair, they're going to do a whole bunch of things. They're going to do a preliminary impression or also a final and also a scan and give you all of the data. So you can play around and mix and match and see what's going to work best for your workflows. You have to try them before you open this up to a broad amount of dentists. And the last part is outsourcing. You are not going to have the resources necessarily to manufacture this in-house right off the get-go. Especially if you already have digital equipment, it is difficult from a crown or bridge perspective to justify milling or printing a denture for that long when you can probably be milling 25 or 35 crowns in the same amount of time. So when we are looking at equipment, you really need to approach this differently. The ROI that you're getting from milling and printing dentures is going to be different than the ROI that you're getting from milling and printing crowns. That does not mean that you're not going to make money. It just means that you have to approach it differently. And so if you are not really ready to grow this and maybe not invest in capital equipment right now, start with outsourcing. So on that vein, currently, if you work with Argen, we are offering Lucitone printed dentures out of our California location. So all Canadians and Americans can partake in this currently. This is open to all customers. So you would send your design file. We offer both printed try-ins and printed final dentures. We are slowly working on our project for our Canadian customers to be offering milled dentures. We don't currently have this available, but it is a product that we are hoping to have sometime this year or early next year. And for now, we are very confident and proud of the Lucitone dentures that are coming out of our facility. They come out fully polished and done, ready to be inserted in the patient's mouth. The feedback that we have been getting has been excellent. The fit is great and the function is great. And people are really, really loving these dentures. So before you have to worry about focusing how to manufacture them, focus first on the workflows, how to partner with your dentists, and how to actually get these the process through from start to finish. When you're ready to take this in-house, we can help you with that too. When you're ready to actually print or mill in-house, we can help you with all of those issues, and we can help you set up your equipment appropriately. But the harder part is figuring out how to work with your dentist. I think as technicians, we like to jump right away to how do we make this and what are we making this out of? And we like to jump over all of the important steps to actually get us to the end part. And even when we're selling to dentists, sometimes we like to jump right to the technical and go, hey, we're going to be milling it with this 5-axis mill, and it has an angulation, and it has a C-clamp, and blah, blah, blah. And you'll see their eyes glaze over. That's not what they're here for. You have to be selling them the workflows, and you have to be selling them the benefits of these workflows. For example, all of the benefits of the try-ins that we spoke to. So the very last thing that we'll touch on is the sum of the clinical frequently asked questions that you might get from your dentist. So we did speak to iOS scanning, and you're going to go to them, you're going to say, we have digital dentures, and they're going to say, well, we don't have an intraoral scanner. They don't need to have an intraoral scanner. They don't even need to have a bench scanner. They don't even need to be taking wash impressions in patients' dentures. They can still be doing the same analog workflows that they've been doing this entire time. However, when they send you a final impression, that final impression needs to somehow be able to articulate to each other. And at that point, we are no longer pouring models. We are scanning it in, and we're going model-less from the final impression on. And again, I already harped on this quite a bit. You will get pushback on this. You will see people saying, well, I like a wax try-in. You really need to be confident in all of the reasons why you don't need a wax try-in and why this is actually better. This is your biggest selling tool, and this is your biggest step into a digital workflow. The last thing is materials and costs. What you might hear out there is that digital denture materials are bad. Now, if you have a customer that's really high-end and really does want like a crazy, ridiculously built denture, maybe don't start with them. Start with your dentures that are doing standard, regular clinical cases. We have seen excellent result with the Lucitone denture material. If you want more information on the longevity or anything like that, the Dentsply website has a lot of really good tools that you can use for selling to your dentist, and also information that you can have in-house on that material. And I know what you're going to see as we get, and I spoke to this earlier, as we get into printing more dentures, you're going to see people saying, well, Joe Blow is printing dentures for $20 down the road. Somebody else is printing their dentures for $30, and I need to make this as cheap as possible. And I think as a lab, we have an opportunity to stand our ground. We are still putting a lot of work into this. It still takes a lot of knowledge, a lot of understanding, and a lot of time to design, to work with these customers, and to really dial in the workflows. The service isn't necessarily just the end product. There's a lot of service that goes into creating these products before we can get to the end product. So just a quick review. We talked through some of the challenges of workforce and how hiring can be difficult at this time. There is a longer video of this specifically from last year that you can find on our Argen website. We talked on workflows, and I will also pass along that workflow sheet. And then we talked about how to get started and how to actually implement this. If you have any further questions on digital dentures, please feel free to reach out to the sales team at Argen Canada. It was a pleasure working with you today.